Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this École des Modernités lecture. We are very happy to welcome tonight Marianne Caws, who's joining us live from New York. Marianne Caws, whom you probably know, is a professor emerita of the French and English literature and responsible for the PhD programs at the Graduate School of Uni. She was. Her work focuses on the relationship between literature and the visual arts in the modern period around artists such as Breton, Woolf, Desnos, Loy, Cornell, and many others. She was the editor of the Yale Anthology of 20th Century French Poetry, and she was the chief editor of the HarperCollins World Reader. Among her numerous publications, I would like to mention Creative Gatherings, Meeting Places of Modernism, published in 2019, Alice Palin Round, Shapeshifter, published in 2021, and for the most recent one, and related to tonight's lecture, Mina Loy, Apology of Genius. Indeed, tonight's lecture will be devoted to Mina Loy, this fantastic figure that is, I believe, overlooked in the plastic arts, not in literature. She's been once studied, but it's the idea of tonight's lecture to focus and to see a course of life and a career. It's entitled Mina Loy, who did just about everything, because she did, and she met almost everyone. That's something that Marianne is going to show us, and I would like to especially thank her. Thank you, Marianne, for accepting this remote lecture and for introducing us to Mina Loy. I'll let you talk now. Thank you.
Okay. I hope not to be too remote. I'll try. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. If I start coughing, I have a cold, but Anyway, on this occasion, I wish I would be in Paris with the Fondation Giacometti, or any time at all. I'd love to be there. I'm doing my best to zoom in correctly, and I want to thank Hugo Daniel for helping me so much. I'm technologically unenabled. So everything about Mina Loy has always gotten me right away, always, and it's not going to stop. Her face, her story, her peculiar, very, very, very peculiar story, going everywhere and doing everything about everything anyone might think of, way beyond what normal or ordinary persons would ever imagine. Can I have the first slide? I can't see the slides. Hugo, that's interesting. Anyway, you're looking at Mina's eyes, right? I'd like to attempt to see what the remarkable Mina Loy was envisioning in her quite extraordinary work. And in any case, I've begun to think, after having plunged for a very long time in the line of that kind of Loy Fa, about the moment, about the poems and the inventions that she did, that in fact is all about the potential of imagination, her incredible omnivorous creativity, as Jennifer Gross puts it in that wonderful catalog about being inevitable. She was everything. I'm quoting Jennifer Gross. She was a reluctant citizen of the British Empire, an assimilated Jew, a resident alien in Italy and France, and finally an American citizen, which I always forget. And in the first chapter of this indispensable large catalog called Mina Loy, Strangeness is Inevitable, there's no way that we want to do away with any strangeness. It's often the ground of poetry, and I'm mostly interested in Mina Loy's poems because I think she was a great poet, and people often read the stories and forget the poems. Anyway, so in 1992, to start at the beginning, I was given The Last Luna Baedeker, edited and introduced by Roger Conover, with whose MIT Press I'd been working for a while, mainly in the realm of surrealism. His dedication on March 11th of that very year, 1992, had read for Marianne Caws, who inhabits the same planetarium. Hal would like to do that right now. Mina Loy. The radiant beauty and being. She could do so many things that gives your mind a spin. She painted, constructed, innovated all sorts of objects, toys, games, materials of various kinds, many discarded rubbish, picked up in the markets, which she called refusé. Could I have the next slide? As in rejected or refused. So she was a fashion designer and did a lot of the clothes herself. She fashioned hats and gowns and lampshades. And the next slide too, please. Her relation to objects was intense in all senses. She used everything she had or found. And that reminds me of that brilliance of Kurt Schwitter's, one of my favorites, treasuring what he found and used. She loved games as she loved words. The blocks, next slide, please. The exaltation of the objet trouvé was hers also, and a kind of ritual keeping was in order. So Dada and so proto-surrealist, and such bizarre delights ensued. Can I have the next slide? I hope it's surreal scene. So that's really bizarre. And she didn't do it all herself. She did it with her daughter. Her daughter was the love of her life, Arthur Craven, and more about him in a moment. I can't ever get away from Arthur Craven. I'm not trying to. Anyway, she did this with Fabienne, and it's very peculiar, of course. And it's quite unlike all Mina Loy's other things. Other works of art, this one includes everything possible and much more impossible. So many objects and imprisonings by whale bones and such like, adorned by the bubbles and midgets and just about everything. Very unlike Mina Loy, who in her own images and writing is all the more, she's simpler, I mean, complicated, but not like this. She's not baroquely all over everywhere. And therefore, I find it very wonderful that this has been included in the catalog. I think that's, if I were doing the catalog, I might have hesitated, put it in an endnote. I'm so glad it's right here. It's scarcely worth mentioning that Mina was the most beautiful person anybody had seen. She was inevitably and radiantly beautiful always, so wonderfully photographed by her first husband and fellow artist she met in art school, Stephen Howes. It's far from being a happy marriage, but I'm less interested in biographical details because they've all been available everywhere for a very long time. Everybody's into Mina Loy, which is wonderful. I think that's great, but you can get everything everywhere. I'm interested in certain moments and giving a sideways glance, the kind I like to give best, not straightforward, but sideways. And so it seems to me that I'm giving myself, hope you'll permit me, the opportunity to cast right now at that sideways glance at sort of places that I'm interested in. Thanks to her indomitable spirit, we moved to all sorts of places in Europe and the US. Forgive the location jumps, but my goodness, she surely made lots of them. I'm concentrating my enthusiasm about this over-the-top, incredible woman artist poet on several moments, not endeavoring anything biographical. But I can at least say that Paris reimagined her center for a period of importance, and I'll start with that beloved place for so many of us. So could we have a few next slides? A self-portrait, a portrait of her naked, wonderfully taken by Stephen Howes. He was a great photographer, not a great husband, great photographer. And sideways, you see her with Joella holding a sculpture, and then the Cabaret du Néant, which is absolutely wonderful. And if we have time, I'll read you some things about that, because that was a great cabaret. I don't know how to start with the pain, but I'm doing that. Here we are, because the late coming juncture, I almost can't bring myself to include Mina's super distressed poem over her husband's betrayal with Amelia Dufries and her loss of her first child, Oda Janet, 2 days after her first birthday. Although not to do that would be to betray the confidence such lengthy plunging into these texts and images has conferred on me. I'm grateful. The self-referral includes the reader, the writer, and the speaker, agonizingly. I am the center of a circle of pain exceeding its boundaries in every direction. And she had a lot of directions. There began the incredibly poetic and imaginative poems of Paris at Night, the one she'd gone back to. Try reading aloud these lines from the Café du Néant, nothing, 1 o'clock at night, and I can read you more of it if I have time, and I don't know if I will, having to do with that. But this is part of it. Little tapers lighted, leaning diagonally, stuck in coffin tables of the Café du Néant. And yet, there are cabs outside the door. She always had to leave. She was leaving places early, as many of us do. She was a great leaver. Always for the moment Parisian, night cafes and museums and galleries, and waiting for the Parisian streets, walking them over and over in her very fashionable raiment that she made by herself, as you saw in Fashionista she was. And she was always knowingly and adorning her own gorgeous profile, and she never bragged about it, which I find magnificent. We have a lot of beautiful friends who say, hey, look at me. She never did the look at me thing. So now we're going to Italy. The next slide is Milan, I hope. And for the confines of this talk, I want to take ourselves, all of us, after Paris geographically, next to Italy, where Mina was temporarily in Florence, where they moved, she and Stephen. I'd like to think at some future point, but this is not the point, about temporary locations, because they are more rewarding, I think, than permanent ones. So I'm interested in wandering, and the homeless, of course, like right now in New York. So in Italy, she was caught up in the world of the futurists, Papini and the incredibly vociferous Marinetti, the prophet of vitalism, that inimitable, explosive course being the most female thing extant. That was herself. I'm somewhat masculine. I've learned how to be happy enough to live. Despite her many writings in many genres, I remain vastly interested by her early attachment to Marinetti and his exuberant variety of futurism. She announced this to Marinetti: anyhow, who am I that I should criticize your theories of plastic velocity? And she saluted him with this poem: man of absolute physical equilibrium, you stand so straight on your legs, every plank or clod you place your feet on becomes roots for those limbs. Your genius, so much less in your brain than your body. I love that. Remembering those hitherto negligible qualities of life that is equally happy, expressing itself through the activity of pushing things in the opposite direction to that which they're normally willing to go. And then Papini, he was married, so she couldn't hitch up with him. Good thing, too. Within Marinetti's major statement, The Destruction of Syntax, Words, and Freedom, she summoned an imagination without strings, and she found a new footing, really stride. About Papini, who was married, alas, and Marinetti, she wrote hysterically comic texts, Milo and others, and I'll read you some if we have time. But I'm getting to the person I really love, who is Arthur Craven. And I'm showing you, next slide, please, the Arensberg Saloon, with a lot of people. And at the middle, you see Mina and Arthur Craven right in the middle, well, to the left in the middle. I hope you can see them. I'm not seeing the slides, Hugo, so I'm just talking. Mina met the boxing, writing champion she was to love unceasingly all her life, Arthur Craven, Fabian Abrunarius Lloyd, with whom she cast her lot. Even the names work amazingly. Fabian Lloyd and Loy sent each other coded messages in words, and also poems, the medium among others, in which she was, can you hear me? Am I losing my hearing?
No, we can hear you, and the images follow.
Okay. She was always amused and amusing about herself and everything. When there was an exhibition of her work, I love this, she would say, why would I go? I've already seen it. Equal to my obsession with Mina Loy is my impassioned engagement from Craven, this genius of the image and performance. What a discovery was his Maintenant. Every single poetic text spilling out from his language, French, magnificently translated by Hale, T.J. Hale. I could read you some if I had time, but I will go on and then I'll come back if we have time at the end. This volume, the volume Maintenant, incredible. It's in French, brilliantly translated, and I found it when I was waiting for a bus. It seemed very remarkable to me to find this aged, tattered thing, which then ruled part of my life. I'm a big believer in chance, and this was really chance. I never got over either poet, Mina Loy or Arthur Craven, nor do I plan to. The recent result is my Mina Loy Apology of Genius, which Hugo mentioned from last year with reaction books. How could anyone recover from a fascination with Arthur Craven, this animal of a man whose intensity has so rarely been equaled? I think probably never. Craven summoned Mina to Mexico, where they were abruptly and yet by another great happenstance of place grandly married. I cannot imagine anyone refusing that summons. Mina summons herself, what a great word is summoning, in her writing about her colossus, that is, of course, Arthur Craven, her gigantesque Craven, and we cannot possibly not salute her account. He was the nephew of Oscar Wilde, among thousands of other things. This is her account. Those first days in Mexico, we wandered ceaselessly arm in arm. It never made any difference what we were doing, making love or respectfully eyeing canned goods and groceries, eating our tomatoes at street corners or walking among weeds. They had no money. Somehow we had tapped the source of enchantment, and it suffused the world. We would have and should have anticipated the embrace of reunion as the congratulatory absolute, which no perspective of time could augment or reduce. When Mina was pregnant with Fabienne, the one with which she did that work I just showed you, she took a ship home, and this is a big alas, Craven set sail in an unseaworthy vessel. He was never seen again. Now, this reminds me of Hart Crane, probably reminds all of us of all those losses. Hart Crane and others lost at sea, celebrated for their writing and their uncertain fate. Craven wrote his several issues of Maintenant in French, and they've been well translated, as I said, and well treasured. Somehow, and right at present, it seems to me that we could set up textual visual camp in something like the poetry of loss, taking into account all we know and have known and will re-encounter throughout our lives, reading, living, and losing. But let me point out right now, immediately, that the prose tale by Mina Loy just quoted is itself of poetic majesty. No matter what the platitudinous of the details and the tomatoes and the weeds, I must stress this point because I think I always emphasize her poetry. I know we emphasize also her seeing, as Hugo pointed out, there's much less stress so far on her objects. I'm one of those poetic people. So my book, Mina Loy, Apology of Genius, Reaction Books 2022, is about poetry. She was a poet in all ways. All she did and wrote and lived, nothing short of that emphasis, poetic. So much of her writing has been published and commented upon, and there seems always to be more. I permit myself to compare this with the girth, enormous girth, of the mysterious and monumental Arthur Craven, at times and more enormous as his mental being was always, and at moments so very thin. I'm showing you one photograph slide of Arthur Craven. I must agree, and I must quote right now from Mina's poem, The Widow's Jazz, a few lines of memorial celebration. He was, of course, gone. Craven, colossal absentee, the substitute dark rolls to the incandescent memory of love's survivor. As my desire receded to the distance of the dead, searches the opaque silence of unpeopled space. And there's a great deal in that poem of space between the stanzas and the words. What a void enduring throughout her life. And what mysteriousness lasted. My point here, taking up again the so quotable maxim on the catalog's cover, strangeness is inevitable, with a lot of space, again, mentally between the terms, if not visually, though there is. It's a celebration of mystery. The fate of all beings and creators concerned with these two geniuses is laid out for them, and indeed for latecomers. I have to say that most extraordinarily, in all the essays and stuff, a lot of stuff I've written, I have rarely had such excitement as I have right this minute, exclaiming about this venture in poetry and sculpture that moves me to tears, even at my very advanced age, as you see, that I shall not be showing today, given all the effort of including lately something we can just picture, and that's Brancusi and the Golden Bird. Magnificent. I loved absenting magnificence a lot. And yet, let us speak for the absentees, about whom Mina Loy knew how to speak fervently. Her personal loss of Gilles, her son, of Oda, of above all, of course, Fabian Avenarius Lloyd, Arthur Craven. So we almost knew him. I want to have known him. I would love to have known him. Now I'm showing you Mina in New York. Next slide. These are a few images of Mina in New York, with a hat. She was great on fashion, as I said, and with a temperature that's a Man Ray photograph. And the next slide is Paris. And this is about that amazing salon of Bonnie. And Bonnie was, of course, very, very beautiful. Everybody was in love with her. Many of us have written majorly about her, and her manuscripts everywhere. To be sure, Mina Loy ended in Aspen, way away from Mexico, and also Paris, and near her daughters, Joella and Fabienne, and their husbands. And that was something real and present. It seems to me to attach her person and personality still to Paris. So this is Bonnie. There she needed and attended and loved Natalie Clifford Bonnie, beautiful Bonnie. Her salon, Le Temple de l'Amitié, a beyond elegant. It was a hangout, actually, Thursdays, I think. Hangout weekly for lesbians and intellectuals of all stripes. Bonnie said of Mina Loy after a few years, I love this, hasn't she already evolved out of this world of appearances? She walks as though the angels were already nibbling at her heels. But meanwhile, she wears a blind gaze among us, as though she has contemplated the Gorgon, a look as if struck with indifference. Her beauty has receded into itself. She offers us this apology of genius as a whole, prismatic poetry that plays with the world, stopped in density, from which, thanks to some perception of a fourth dimension, she escapes. That's still the slide of Bonnie, I hope. Mina's son Gilles, whom Stephen had taken away, had died. Indeed, part of her world was collapsing. Oda, her child of a year and 2 months, had also died, and Mina was forced to persevere. That she did greatly. At the Temple de l'Amitié, still the Bonnie place, she read some of her poems and her tribute to Gertrude Stein, another guest in the Bonnie Salon, who wrote of Mina, who was plainly unforgettable years later. Mina Loy was able to understand without the commas. She's always been able to understand, and that's, of course, why we try to understand her. Interestingly, Mina's awakening to what we call modernism arose mainly in one of what she called her apprenticeships in relation to other artists' work, such as that of Brancusi, about whom I've talked, in honor of whose sculpture she wrote the more remarkable poem I just mentioned. There's a noble group portrait of Brancusi with Mina and other friends, and it's all included in my, of course, inevitable book about Mina Loy. And I think this essay that she wrote is wonderful, essay on Stein, including this poem, casting her as the Madame Curie of language, saving the world with her extractions. Curie of the laboratory, of vocabulary, she crushed the tonnage of consciousness, congealed to ashes and phases to extract a radium of the word. We can instantly see in this poem, as in many others, Mode and the Inevitable, and anthologies that Roger Conover has wonderfully assembled, the extreme preciseness, the precision of her word choice, remarkable in every instance. For that reason, I can only refer to her poems as to her every piece of writing, including her stories, her manifestos, and even her plays and her acting in Lima Beans, that amazing thing that she put on with William Carlos Williams. And he was, of course, another poet. So it was like two poets acting out Lima Beans. And I'm showing you now the shop where you see Mina and Peggy Guggenheim. And I love the picture of their working together, Mina and Peggy Guggenheim. And then Mina arrives in New York, leaving Paris for New York. How brave and wonderfully, incredibly resourceful she was, repeatedly. For example, escaping the mournful possibilities of her life, she was able to head for New York in 1916 from Paris, taking her lampshades, paintings, and drawings seen in the shop with Peggy Guggenheim, hoping to sell them. Well, she needed money, like who doesn't? She bought her passage by selling Howarth's family heirlooms, leaving her children in the care of a trusted friend, and arriving to be taken up by the literary circle there, as in the Arenberg apartment. You could now see, let's look at that, the Arenberg apartment, where the celebrated publication The Blind Man was hatched with the independent number on April the 10th, 1917. In honor of that occasion, Mina, always fashion conscious, concocted for herself a startling white gown with printer's marks. She was never less than astonishing. I believe heartily in absences, and so I am with a genius friend of long date, Jonathan Eburn, concocting a project on obsessions and omissions. In the line of this, I'll point out how everything about the Brancusi sculpture celebrated so lovingly by Mina Loy, how movingly she salutes what she chooses to salute, my goodness, gets to the core of what she knew so well how to take into grand account. And you can perceive it easily in my Mina Loy book, hint, hint, and of course in the catalog. And here's just the beginning and the end of the Brancusi. Those bookends matter so greatly. Brancusi, Golden Bird, seen by those eyes of Mina Loy you saw in the beginning, begins like this. This toy become the aesthetic archetype, the immaculate conception of the inaudible bird occurs in gorgeous reticence. I love the reticence. I can see it even as figured only in her poem and orientation. As Jennifer Gross points out in the massive catalog, Loy taps into the reaction and Ruskinian current of the grotesque as, quote, rising from the confession of the imagination by images it cannot totally grasp. Very Ruskinian. Now, fortunately, that leaves permitted room for the intended readers. That, and also as Dawn Addis points out, she lived variously, she being Mina, of course, about whom else would I be talking? She lived variously in Paris, Florence, New York, Mexico, then Paris again, New York, and finally Aspen. That's Dawn Addis saying where she lived. That just about sums up what so confuses anyone eager to follow like a camp follower, as I am, the art of and the person of, the problems of such a polymathic personality. I feel that I must right now recite the beginning of that superb tribute to Craven already cited from its Never Giving Up widow, Craven, colossal absentee, the substitute dark, rose to the incandescent memory of love's survival. It seems to me now that the everlasting widow's pain, like the widow's jazz, deserves repeating, even as we well know, Mina was, I quote, a Loy unto herself, playing but how seriously, with any verbal possibility. And that has preserved her enduring celebration, that of her endlessly beloved Arthur Craven, and saved her in her self-celebration and well unto our present day and night. Next slide. This is going to be two things, Mina in New York with a hat and Mina with the temperature. That's a Man Ray photograph. I love it. Parenthetically, perhaps, the voice of Mina Loy, which seemed to me very cultivated British. I saw it in the Roger Conover's exhibition. Who knows? I didn't, no idea what her voice was like. Who knows her history, Roger Conover, better than anybody? Her, quote, hyper-enunciated mongrel accent, a striking admixture of the languages she spoke, English, French, Italian, Yiddish, German, none of which she formally studied. She just knew she was, as we know, a genius. She really was. The one language she knew, says Carnival, was the language of constant exile and restlessness, of the not belonging, of outsiderhood. She was a cultural nomad. Sorry, can't read my writing. Nomad in every sense. Symbolist, futurist, Dada, surrealist, feminist, conceptualist. She was all and none of them. She moved in and out of avant-garde art circles in London, Paris, Florence, and New York, each time reauthoring and reinventing herself, her poems, her paintings, her objects. Her Bowery rooms were above the aesthetics of everyday life and the textures of poverty, but they included everything. Her art was about, I'm quoting Conover again, making art as she was living life out of almost nothing, out of what she had, out of what she could find in the back alleys and abandoned streets of Lower Manhattan. Her companion artists were Marcel Duchamp and Joseph Cornell, as recognized by Roger Conover, who well recognized Mina Loy. No wonder she fell in love with Arthur Craven, that elusive poet, boxer, and shapeshifter whose only artifact was himself and the rumors and endgames he left behind. Now we're looking at the slide of the communal cot, and if that doesn't blow your mind, I don't know what will. It blew mine entirely, and then I had to write about it. The double and entwined memories and persons of Mina and Craven reside, for some readers, among whom I count myself, obsessive witnesses to the ultimate poverty of the figures there lying as if already entombed in the material of the sculpted papier-mâché and rags. So you look at that communal cot, they had to sleep there, they had nowhere else to sleep. I remain especially attached to Loy's astounding relation to objects, perhaps especially the sculpted papier-mâché, and the rags of the communal cot of 1950, with the Bowery bums sprawled out or kneeling, bearing its unspeakable and almost unbearable to envision. Like her eyes, she envisioned a hell of a great deal. Witness to the ultimate poverty of the figures there lying as if openly entombed. Next slide, which is of Marcel Duchamp and the praying bums. So this is like what we're looking at, but different. This material of sculpted papier-mâché and rags again is associated in our minds with the marvelous rendering of Marcel Duchamp alongside the praying bums. These are both rendered marvelously and backlinked with Mina Loy's epic poem about New York's Babylon of the Bowery, with its religious reference to the cross and the Lenten pastry of the hot cross bun, her hot cross bum of 1945, and any of you who are religious or knowing the rituals will recognize this. Bungling of actuality, exchanging an inobvious real for the over-obvious irreal. Some passing church or social worker confides to a brother how he has managed to commandeer a certain provision of hot cross buns. And that's, of course, about the bums and the buns. She was very great on wordplay, and I want to then continue this eager presentation. It's eager because Mina Loy, and all her various names, as she enjoyed playing with other nomenclature, she was in many different names, as he was, playing in the strongest and most positive sense of the word. I'll use play, like real play, as she did with all sorts of languages and material elements, that play inspiring her own energy with a certain and irreplaceable correspondence. I consider, and it's for me a compliment of the highest order, Mina Loy a surrealist. That's the highest order for me that exists. And the entire mindset of surrealism has to do with the idea of correspondence. Those marvelous correspondences, as in the scientific experiments of the communicating vessels, another thing I had to translate, I loved it, of Breton, a highly significant illustration of the tenets of surrealism, how right and night and day, and right and wrong, and outside and inside, and science and poetry intervene and intersect with each other. Can we have, I guess, the next to last slide, Christ on a clothesline? If that doesn't get you, nothing will. It got me, and I am almost ending with it. The pitiful face of the magnificent and heart-rending Christ on a clothesline reflects the way the poverty-stricken residents in London were allowed, for a modest sum, to be hung on a line in a row to sleep. Mina's Christian Science self was here emphasizing the religious part, and we can only salute that issue, even in that distressing face, including that face of a fisherman she encountered. And I have more slides of that, but next time. The great thing, among other equally great things about Mina Loy, is how we encounter with her so much that matters. The slide of Joseph Cornell. In almost closing, I hope to close on 2 poems, but I'm almost closing. I choose the correspondence of Mina Loy and Joseph Cornell, firmly anchored in their fidelity to Christian Science and to each other's friendship from a long date, as those weekly meetings confirmed. And in their honor, well, I was living with a Christian Scientist in Paris, so I had to play the piano, which I play miserably, at the Christian Science meetings. I visited now in New York the Christian Science Church on 42nd and Madison, right around the corner from the graduate school, to engage in the ritual as best I could. My editing of Cornell's diaries and letters and filmic obsession prepared me for a close reading of those letters exchanged during her stays in New York and then in Aspen. And my book, Marianne Caws, Joseph Cornell's Theater of the Mind, Selected Diaries, Letters and Files, London, New York, Thames and Hudson, 1988. I really believe we should refer to all our writings as much as we can. That's not much of a joke, but it's a poor joke. Cornell was particularly interested in the way in which Mina found her own destiny raveled up, as he puts it, with the moon. He saw what many of us could not yet see. But in her all-seeing view, she indeed did. Indeed, Mina's meditations on the cosmos ranged far and wide, horizontally and vertically. As she pointed out to Joseph Cornell, a co-believer in the cosmic vision, I should see how much time I have left. We are a ramshackle edifice around an external exaltation, a building to which the moralities are a flight of stars whose bases dissolve in the wake of our ascension. Being alive is a queer coincidence. I love it. The way that she took coincidences to be the real thing is the way that I think we do, like now and here. And though I'm not in Paris, I take it. The great thing, among other equally great things about Mina Loy, is how we encounter so much in every moment just by being with and seeing with her. And I really want to close on a high note. I don't know, Hugo, how far I am from ending, but because I'm not looking at my clock, but let's read 2 of her poems about everything. The one I love is from 1914. Amazing to me that it was so early in her life. There is no life or death, only activity. And in the absolute is only propensity. There is no first or last, only equality. And who would rule joins the majority. There is no space or time, only intensity. And tame things have no immensity. So she didn't tame a lot. She was immensity. And I do believe that. I'm not just saying it today. I believe it, or of course I wouldn't be writing on it. And then I want to read you a poem called Time Bomb. And it's from 1945. So there's a long stretch between that poem and this poem. Time Bomb. The present moment is an explosion, a scission, past and future. leaving those valorous disreputables, the ruins, sentinels in an unknown dawn, strewn with prophecy. Only the momentary goggle of death fixes the fugitive momentum. And I should point out, since I'm reading from my own book, that you have to, when you read that poem visually, leave a space. There's a lot of space between one word and another, and I think that spatial thing, the spatiality of Mina Loy, is really what I should emphasize every time I write about her. I think I'll read it again. The present moment is an explosion, a scission of past and future, leaving those valorous disreputables, the ruins, sentinels in an unknown dawn strewn with prophecy. Only the momentary goggle of death fixes the fugitive momentum. And what I love is that she didn't date her poems. Therefore, Roger Conover, who knows when they come from, has dated them, but we always have to think about her thinking about her poems. How much time do I have left, Roger? Can he hear me? No.
Yes, you have 15 minutes if you'd like to read more.
15 minutes?
More. Yeah.
Okay. 15 minutes. Let me read more poems. Thank you. I mean, there's so much I could read, but I love the ones I'll read most. I want to read a poem about Paris. This is you saw the Café du Néant, the cafe of nothing. I love the nothing because the nothing was always very big. And that's the beginning of the 1 o'clock at night that I read you some of. Though you'd never possessed me, she was there with somebody she then loved. She loved a lot of people until she met Arthur Craven, then she didn't love anybody else, not even herself. She loved Arthur, I think, more than herself. I guess when you're in love, that's what you do. I like to hope that's what you do. This is the beginning. Though you'd never possessed me, I had belonged to you since the beginning of time. And sleepily, I sat on your chair beside me, leaning against your shoulder, and your careless arm across my back gesticulated as your indisputable male voice roared through my brain and my body. Beautiful half hour of being a mere woman, the animal woman understanding nothing of man. And I cough because of that. Anyway, who am I that I should criticize your theories of plastic velocity? Let us go home. She's tired. She wants to go to bed. That's Mina Loy writing, of course, about herself from the other person's point of view. She could always take somebody else's point of view. I love that. And let me read you more of the Cafe of Nothing since I have time. Little tapers lighted, leaning diagonally, stuck in coffin tables of the Cafe du Néant. You love the coffin tables, right? Leaning to the breath of baited bodies like young poplars fringing the while, eyes that are full of love and eyes that are full of cold. That, I don't wear mascara, but that mascara. Projecting light across the fulsome ambiente, trailing the rest of the animal behind them, telling of tales without words and lies of no consequence one way or another. In this factious chamber of death, the woman, as usual, is smiling as bravely as it's given to her to be brave, while the brandy cherries and winking glasses are decomposing harmoniously with the flesh of spectators at a given spot. There is one having the concentric lighting focus precisely upon her, prophetically blossoms in perfect putrefaction. Oh, yes, there are cabs outside the door. So the cabs are always there, and she's always there. Let me read you something funny about Papini Marinetti. She calls them Gina and Giovanni, of course, Giovanni and Gina. Who were they? God knows. They knew, because they were both a little bit, shall we say, conceited. I mean, they were into themselves, like none of us here are, of course, but they knew it was important to them, this being of who they were. They were themselves corporeally, transcendentally, consecutively, conjunctively, and they were quite complete. Ding dong, said the bell. Miovani, Gina called. Would be fitting for you to tell the time for supper. Who, said Miovani. I am outside time and space. Patience, said Gina, is an attribute, and she learned at any hour to offer the dish appropriately delectable. And, since I'm on this page, let me say about her loss of her baby, Oda. 1 year and 2 months. In the Duomo on Christmas Eve, midnight, a cool wax baby is born of the light of 1,000 candles. He's quite perfect of that perfection which means immunity from the inconsistencies of life. Perfect in pinks and whiteness, and blue-eyedness, and yellow silk curliness, and nearly as bright as a tinsel star that rises on the forehead. Worship him. He's a Christian Scientist, right? For his infinitesimal mouth has no expansiveness for puckering to the heart-saving wail of the newborn, hungry one. In the Duomo, at Christmas Eve, midnight, there's another baby, a horrible little baby, made of half-warm flesh that's covered with sores, carried by a half-broken mother, and I, who am called heretic, and the only follower in Christ's footsteps among this crowd, adoring a wax doll. For I alone am worshiping the poor sore baby, the child of sex, ignorance, and poverty. So she's protesting against the New York's heartlessness and the Bowery. She lived, of course, at the end of her life, right before moving to Aspen. She lived in the Bowery among the bums, and you've heard some of that. I don't think I read you from Craven, and since I have time, let me read you this. I think I didn't read you. Le rythme de l'océan berce les transatlantiques, et dans l'air où les gaz dansent tels des toupies, tandis que siffle le rapide héroïque qui arrive au Havre, s'avance comme des ours, les matelots atlantiques. New York, New York, je voudrais t'habiter. J'y vois la science qui se marie à l'industrie dans une audacieuse modernité. Et dans les palais, des globes éblouissants à la rétine par les rayons ultraviolets, le téléphone américain et la douceur des ascenseurs. Should I read you the English? Whistle decks lulled by the rhythm of the ocean, while in the gases the air swirls like turling tops. No, I think the French is better. Bonjour. So I want to read you also about the communal cup, the one that you saw, the communal cup. I want to read you a little bit from that. And always on the trodden street, the communal cot, embalmed in rum, under an unseen baldachin of dream, blinking his inverted sky of flagstone. Prone lies the body of the flop, where he dropped. This is an epic poem. I know everybody loves to cite the Mongol and the Rose. I love to cite this one. I find this is the most epic poem she wrote, and for me, it's the epic poem. It's about, of course, the bombs and the Bowery, and it's about life, lying down, getting up, except, of course, they won't, kneeling, some kneel, and always on the trodden street. I'm going to read it to you again. The communal cot, embalmed in rum, under an unseen baldachin of dream, blinking his inverted sky of flagstone, prone lies the body of the flop where'er he drops. One still savors the favor of Eros. She never took love, that erotic love, out of anything. Her love of Craven endures. In this sore cemetery of the comatose, here lies. And this final play of Comatose and Eros ends with this mad vagabonding, mad erotic wanderer. And he exults like this: a vagabond in delirium, aping the rise and fall of ocean, of inhalation, of coition. So it ends very much with Eros. And I love that her poems, Christian Scientist though she was, her poems, because of Arthur Craven, probably always end like that. I want also to read you, since I have time, just one thing about New York. Vision on Broadway. Seldom the accustomed heart succumbs to sentiment. Seldom an appearance on the street. Seldom a vision. attains perfection. But maybe it was only a boy in porn. She mixes prose in her poems. I love that, the prose. You know, I've written a lot on the prose poem. I care, we all care, or many of us care, about the prose poem, and we have a volume coming out about yet another about the prose poem. Vision on Broadway. Maybe it was only a boy in uniform, amused to array his baby son, his own replica. The pedestrian in a streetcar did not cheer or bow down before this American soldier. I don't read it as only ironic. I read it as real. So I place in this book, I place that, the salute to America, alongside the uniform and her objects. She made a lot of objects during the war, made a V for victory and for commercial reasons, but also with some genuine affection and admiration of the military exercising itself. And the replica here and other unpublished poems, these poems didn't get published, perhaps from the same time period, it says something about the repetition itself. And there's another poem that's supposed to be grouped with these. It's called Chiffon Velours. And you can hear in Chiffon Velours the attraction of this fashionista for making her very own raiment. I'll say clothes, but raiment in her case. She is seer, her features verging on a shriek reviling age, flee from death in odd directions, somehow retained by a web of wrinkles. The sight of vanished breasts is marked by a safety pin. Rigid, at rest against the cornerstone of a department store. Hers alone to model the last creation. Original design of destitution, clothes in memorial straps, skimpy even for a skeleton, trimmed with one sudden burst of flowery cotton. Half her black skirt glows as a soiled mirror, reflections the gutter, a yard of chiffon velours. And then you hear, and I love this, and I will certainly end with this, these downcast figures, because, you know, you saw some downcast figures lying in the Bowery. And of course, she went in her nightgown among those bums. She did that in her nightgown. Never mind that she was a fashionista. Mina Loy went in her nightgown among the Bowery bums. And I'm going to end with this subway poem. This prefigures the Bowery bums, but it says it all. The Emperor Void is going, the void, like her void after Craven left, disappeared, disappeared, we don't know. I almost saw God in the metro. In that state of animated coma, the condition of clochard, this gray head slumped on a platform bench like the Emperor Void, on a throne to which no one pretends, is wrapped in aloofness, august as deity. An inordinate flower opening undefiled among ordure. The poem seems complete, and it is its own statue, unslumped, godlike, and about to blossom where it is, and it could be anywhere. The point is the figure's purity. And, you know, Mina Loy was incredibly pure. In its emptiness of hope, this void is our world in the subway, or out and our world. And of course, it leads me to Wallace Stevens. Many things do, but it does. The Emperor of Ice Cream, an unheroic statue to all visible appearances of down and out figure who embodies the spiritual universe, just being a roller of big cigars, the muscular one, who's the ruler of all the universe. And so I think that I want to end on that universe and the subway, which you would take if you were in New York. Thank you, Hugo.